All right, if you want to turn to Psalm 123. And Psalm 123 is only 4 verses, so we're going to look at Psalm 124 as well. And they kind of go together, Psalm 123 and Psalm 124. So we'll look at both of those tonight. But I labeled the first 4 verses of 123, basically, that entire psalm, the Master of Mercy. The Master of Mercy. So I'll read those 4 verses here. Psalm 123 says, "Unto thee lift up my eyes, O thou that dwellest in the heavens. Behold, as the eyes of servants look unto the hand of their masters, and as the eyes of a maiden unto the hand of her mistress, so our eyes wait upon the Lord our God, until that he have mercy upon us. Have mercy unto us, O Lord, have mercy upon us, for we are exceedingly filled with contempt. Our soul is exceedingly filled with the scorning of those that are at ease, and with the contempt of the proud." That first verse, unto thee lift up my eyes. Just the few previous Psalms, in Psalm 121 and Psalm 122, there was references to looking up. We saw in 121 looking up to the hills, and seeing in that psalm we were looking at Jerusalem. Psalm 122 was looking within Jerusalem, and now we're looking at the eyes of God Himself, looking up to God Himself, looking up to Him. And the one study I was looking at was referencing how we're called to not look at the circumstances around us, or to look at our own issues, to look at our own problems, or look at the problems around us, but to look to God alone. And it's a lesson that's a lot of times taken from the story of Peter when he was walking on the water to Jesus. And it's a reference that's made so often, but it's so true. It's so true that as he was walking and he was looking to Jesus, everything was fine. But as soon as he turned his eyes off and said, "Whoa, that wave is pretty big," or "This is a storm, I'm actually walking in the storm right now," then he started sinking. And it's so easy for us as humans, we think maybe even just being responsible, we start looking at the circumstances around us and we go, "Hey, this is pretty bad, this is pretty serious, maybe we should," and we lose track of what God's really wanting, desiring from us. And so keeping our eyes focused on Him is always the best. "As I lift up my eyes unto the Lord, that dwells in the heavens." And recognizing that He dwells in the heavens is also a great comfort to us. He's bigger than I am. He's God. He holds the whole world that I exist in the palm of His hand, the entire universe. I am so small compared to His great creation, and yet He knows everything about me. He knows one of the children in my family made a reference about how amazing that God knows everything about even the little birds He knows when a sparrow falls. That's amazing. And we're much more valuable than animals, and yet He knows those very little details. And so it's comforting that He's in heaven, we're not, and yet He knows everything about us. And so great comfort as we look unto Him with our eyes, we forget about the circumstances around us, the issues that seem so big right now to us at our level. He knows that, and He's in complete control of those things. So great comfort with that. In verse 2, it says, "Behold, as the eyes of the servant." So the eyes I'm looking up to God now, I'm looking with the same intent as the eyes of a servant will look at the hands of his master, or the eyes of a maiden to the hands of her mistress. And this reference is referencing servants. Servants will look at the hands of their masters. And one illustration I thought was really interesting when that was made here was a servant will a lot of times, in Bible times, would stand behind their master. So you'd have a master at the head of a table, or anywhere, someone that would be directly responsible for them. The servant would be behind, and he'd watch the hands. And if the hands were, "Oh, my glass is empty, I need something," or "I can't find, or I need another," or "something's missing on the plate," they would watch the hands, and if the hands seemed like there was a problem, we're right there. "Hey, what's going on? What can we, and a well attentive waitress or waiter will do that. "Oh, you need some more," and they'll really be helpful, and they'll watch the hands for any need. And isn't it interesting, as I look to God, verse 1 seems to allude to the fact that God help me. I'm looking to you because I need you to help me. Here in verse 2, I'm looking not for help, but I'm looking for service. I'm saying, "God, I want to watch your hands getting ready to, what are you moving to do? Are you moving in this area of ministry? Are you moving to open this door? Are you moving to Or maybe I want you to do this, but you're moving your hand over here. Are you, maybe your will isn't to solve this problem for me right now. You want me to do something else instead. And so all of a sudden the focus changes, and I'm not looking to God's hands to say, solve the problem, God. I'm looking at his hands saying, what do you want me to do? As your servant, I'm called to obey you first and foremost. And so what a way to get my mind off me first and say, now I'm looking at what does God want me to do? Okay, he's the master. I desire to serve him. At the very end of verse 2, until that you have mercy upon us. So I'm going to focus on God, desiring his mercy. Whatever I'm going through, I know I need his mercy. And he will give it to me as I serve him. In verse 3, have mercy upon us, for we are exceedingly filled with contempt. So whatever I'm doing, whether I'm focusing too much on myself or I'm serving you, I'm still going to need that constant mercy. And the reason why is I'm exceedingly filled with contempt. And in verse 4 it says, I am filled with scorn as well. Contempt is probably, and one definition I read here is probably the worst kind of rejection. Contempt is the worst kind of rejection because it's not simply a cold shoulder or I don't want to talk to you, but it's me turning my back on you and then saying such nasty things about you. My language, my body language, everything about my lifestyle is gonna point to I don't just not want to be around you, I hate you. Everything about you, the way you dress, the way you walk, the way you talk, everything. The contempt is just completely, it completely fills this person's hate towards somebody else. And so it's the worst kind of rejection is one definition I read. It comes from, it says in verse 4, our soul is exceedingly filled with scorning and contempt. At the end of verse 4, the contempt comes from the proud. Verse 3 and 4 uses the word filled. That word in Hebrew means to saturate. So when I think of saturate, that's even, you think of a cup that's overflowing or too much filled. Think of saturated, that's way too much. If you take a towel and it's saturated already, you can't use that towel at all. It's useless. Something that's saturated with, think of someone's life that is saturated or filled with contempt and scorning. It's a pretty discouraging state to be in. Apart from the Lord, apart from his help, that'd be a pretty horrible place to be. In verse 4, it says filled with that scorning. Continue kind of a feed off of the contempt, verbally attacking on what this person stands for, and it comes from someone that is a person of ease. And then in verse 4, the contempt comes from a person that is proud. And when I see those, I think of somebody that is not desiring at all to be obedient. Someone at ease is not someone ready to serve, is what I see. If someone's at ease, it could speak to a peace they have. It doesn't necessarily speak to a negative thing. But for somebody in this case, in this particular context, is somebody that's sitting back and going, I don't care what God wants. I don't care what my neighbor wants. I don't care about being involved in anything. I'm just going to sit back and I'm going to make fun of everyone else around me that's either struggling or going through a hard time or even just trying to figure out what God wants them to do. This person at ease, it doesn't have any concerns at all for those things. And a proud person really thinks too highly of themselves. Being proud can be a pretty dangerous place because you're taking things that God has done in your life many times and putting value on yourself. Hey, I did that. I can accomplish that on my own. The reason why I can sit here in ease, the reason why I don't have any quote-unquote problems is all up to, it's all based on what I've done. And that contempt comes from that state of proudness, because you can look down at somebody and say, well, if you were more like me, or thank God I didn't make those mistakes. And it's easy to do, and that's something that can really infiltrate and destroy somebody in ministry or somebody that's trying to help somebody else. It's pretty easy to get in a place of not as vicious as this, but to a certain level of contempt where I'm looking down at something going, man, you're a mess. I'm so glad I'm not there, And it's so easy to get to that place, but it's wrong. It's very, very dangerous. But for the author here, he is in the place of receiving this scorn, receiving this contempt. but his eyes are focused on the Lord. He wants to have God's mercy alone intervene in his life. But verse 2 reminds us he's focusing on his hands. He's focusing on service. He needs his mercy. He needs his help. But in the midst of that, he's serving. God, help me serve you while you help me. Not a helpless, I'm stranded, God, you need to help me. I need your help, but I also need to be actively serving you as well. This ties into Psalm 124 really, really well. In verses 1 through 5, it asks two questions, and then it gives some answers. In verse 1 of 124, it says, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side, now may Israel say, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side, when men rose up against us, then they had swallowed us quick, when their wrath was kindled against us. Then the waters had overwhelmed us, the stream had gone over our soul. Then the proud waters had gone over our soul. So the question is asked twice in verse 1 and 2, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side. I mean, we can, as Christians today, I think it's healthy, and the Apostle Paul takes that mindset many times when he's writing to churches and he's addressing tough issues that they're going through, or he addresses the persecution they're facing, or he addresses just the immoral cities and villages and countries they're living in, and he's saying, there's a lot of horrible stuff going on around you, but you know what? You remember you used to be in that scene. You used to have that lifestyle. In Romans, and it mentions even the homosexual relationship. Some of you had those relationships. Some of you had those lifestyles, but God saved you from that. And so as Christians, I think we're asking this question many times ourselves, but for this author here, he's reminding himself, if God hadn't been there, if the Lord wasn't on my side, what then? And in Israel's case, Israel can ask that question many times. Many people don't know exactly where. This was a song written by David. So is this almost prophetic, looking into the Babylonian captivity? That was a pretty discouraging time. It was a pretty horrible time. Another nation, an ungodly, immoral country comes in, totally destroys Jerusalem, takes out a lot of inhabitants, takes away good people, melts down all the gold and beautiful things in the temple, destroys it. I mean, sad, horrible time for Israel. But Daniel, others could look back and say, you know what, that was a bad time, but God was still there. God still protected us. God still gave us the land back. God still gave us a temple for us to rebuild. God was still there with us. If the Lord hadn't been our side, what then? If the Lord hadn't been our side, verse 2, when men rose up against us. It was bad. It was bad, but think how many times we've been saved from total destruction. God was still there with us. If he hadn't been on our side, in verse 3 answers the question, we would have been swallowed up quick when the wrath was kindled against us. And the picture in all three of those verses, 3, 4, and 5, all speak to high waters, water coming in and just completely surrounding, enveloping, drowning, being overwhelmed with water. And thankfully, I've never been in a place of like where there was a flood, but it's always scary because there's nowhere else to go. When water, you can't go underwater and stay there for a while. It's dangerous, and I've seen swollen rivers. I've seen fast moving water, and it's scary. You're so glad that you're in a safe place. The picture there is like a massive front of water comes in, a massive wall comes, and it can just swallow you up quick. The waters that overwhelmed us in verse 4, the streams that had gone over our soul. It could have been complete destruction. It could have been if the Lord was not on our side. Verse 5, the same way, the proud waters had gone over our soul. Again, these floods, in an allegorical sense, these floods of waters can't be proud. Water can't be proud, but the picture is these proud people, like we saw in Psalm 123. These proud people, these people of ease, have no problem at all, tearing people down, looking down at them, having contempt for them, scorning them. And in verse 5, very willing to just completely overwhelm them, discourage them so much, put so much pressure on them, and it's attacking them for who they are. It can very, very quickly happen. And God's people had been in that state over and over and over again. Thankfully, God was on their side. God was the one that was looking out for them. God was the one that was protecting them. And as it says in verse 1 and 2, he was on their side. And that prevented complete destruction. The last two verses, or three verses here, 6 and 8. Blessed be the Lord who has not given us as a prey to their teeth. He helped us. He prevented this total destruction. Specifically, bless the Lord. He has not given us as prey to their teeth. And it brings to mind just a complete, just a very vivid illustration of a wild animal attacking its prey, ripping it up, destroying it, and you see the animal's flesh in the predator's teeth. God, thank you that we didn't come to that place, that our enemies didn't have that complete total destruction of us that could have happened. You prevented that, Lord. We're not caught in the teeth of our enemies. Another illustration in verse 7, the idea of a bird. Our soul has escaped as a bird out of the snare of the fowlers. The snare is broken, and we are escaped. We could have been trapped. We could have been caught for a long time. More destruction could have happened, but we escaped. You allowed the trap to be broken. You allowed the fowler not to be able to completely catch us. Our snare broke loose. We're free. We're free. It ends with, our help is in the name of the Lord who has made heaven and earth. So it goes back to the beginning of verse 1 or Psalm 123, where my help, my hope, the mercy I'm looking for all comes from the Lord. It ends in verse 8 there as well. Our help is in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth. He's not just in heaven, as we saw at the beginning of 123. I look to him with my eyes who dwells in heaven. He didn't just make heaven or is in heaven. He made it. He made it, and he made the earth as well. I think it's interesting, in 123, we're looking at his hands. As faithful servants, we're looking at how he's moving, how he's getting ready to, what he's getting ready to perform in our lives and in the lives of those around us, in our church specifically. And it reminds us in verse 8 there, 124, he's the one who made heaven and earth. How did he make those? It never says he uses his hands. In the book of Genesis, the first few chapters, it just says he spoke. He spoke. Now he made man with his hands. He said he formed man, formed him, and that's a verb that illustrates hands. He formed hands with his hands forming the dust and making it into a man. But everything else, he spoke with his words. He spoke with his words, and so how powerfully he used his words to create a whole world that we can live in. And yet several other verses illustrate his hands. His hands get ready to avenge us. His hands get ready to pick up the sword. All those things. What a great God we serve. Our help truly comes in the name of the Lord, made heaven and earth. I kind of wrote a conclusion here that the mercy and help comes from the Lord. We are called to look to him for help and serve him faithfully. Without him, we can do nothing. And so, with that reminder, I think it's such a neat. Not really a twist, but it helps us to not be so sorry for ourselves that God, I need your help. God, we look to, when we think of looking up to somebody, it's just like a baby, like a small child. Please hold me, holding up their hands. Please help me. And yet I'm not that helpless. I have to look to him, but he also calls me now get ready to serve. Don't just wait for me to pick you up and all your problems are taken care of. Get ready to serve me as well. Watch what I'm doing. Watch what I need to do. Watch what I've created you to do. So it's a good reminder there as we conclude that he is the God of mercy, he's the God of help. He has saved us from so much. We can never repay him. It's never us doing enough to pay him back for what he saved us from, for sure. Israel could never do that. We could never do that. But at the end, we are called to serve. Faithfully watching his hands, get ready to serve him as he directs us. And that's really, I've said this several other times, that's really the summary of our Christian life as we go into times of uncertainty. What am I called to faithfully do right now? Maybe it's something different. Maybe it's doing something that we aren't comfortable doing. But we're always called to serve. And that mentality of, let's go hide, let's go, there was people that have reached out to me saying we need to leave and go together as a group and hide out somewhere and be a community, be a cloister in a sense. We'll just take care of us Christians and we don't see that. We don't see a mentality of run away, hide. I got a spot for you to hide here. There's a spiritual illustration of refuge. There's a spiritual refuge of spiritual picture of being hidden under his wings. On the cleft of the rock, he protects us. It's all spiritual. physically, what am I called to do? Faithfully just keep working. Faithfully do what God's called me to do. As long as I can faithfully do that, as long as I'm not hindered to do that, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be called to do that. So, good reminder there for us. Any questions on that? Any thoughts on those two psalms specifically?